Welcome back to today's Explainer. We are diving headfirst into an absolutely massive, deeply profound topic today. We're going to unpack an immense body of academic research surrounding traditional Korean philosophical and religious thought. Specifically, we're looking at the analysis and review of Donghak and Daesoon thought. If you've ever wondered how traditional Eastern philosophies intersect with our hypermodern world, well, you are definitely in for a treat. Let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around the gravity of what we're looking at today, we just have to think about this number. Over 1,000. That is the massive scale of academic papers and literature dedicated to analyzing Donghak and Daesoon thought. I mean, this isn't just some niche historical footnote. It's a monumental academic pursuit. Scholars have literally spent decades analyzing the shift from practical learning, or silhak, to Donghak, trying to understand the philosophical, religious, and social implications of a uniquely self-generated Korean modernity. The sheer volume of this research, it totally proves its undeniable historical and modern significance. So, here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll kick things off with the 3 streams of prior research, transition into religious thought and key researchers, compare political and cultural modernity, explore the philosophical approaches, and finally, wrap up with a totally fascinating convergence with fractal science. All right, jumping right into Section 1, the 3 streams of prior research. You see, to actually make sense of over 1,000 academic papers, scholars historically divided this giant mountain of literature into 3 distinct buckets. First up, popular movements, which looks at the actual historical unfolding of events on the ground, like the Donghak peasant revolution. Second is religious thought, which elevates these movements to really compare their spiritual ideologies. And the third bucket, philosophical thinking methods, which digs deep into the abstract cognitive frameworks behind these traditions. Now, early research focused really heavily on that first bucket. They used a social science approach to understand the popular movements. Researchers were looking at the spiritual transformation of the public and the historical significance of how a grassroots religious movement essentially exploded into a massive social revolution right there on the ground. Moving on to Section 2, religious thought and key researchers. So, as scholars zoomed in on those grassroots movements, they elevated them into highly structured religious frameworks. And a crucial example of this is a brilliant conceptual leap by researcher Jung Jin Hong. He introduced this concept of theos. Basically, he categorized Taoism as mimesis, Buddhism as mythos, Confucianism as logos, and Donghak? Well, Donghak was theos. He argued that it marked a monumental new phase, really cementing its absolute modernity in Korean religious history. It's a fascinating way to frame it. And other pivotal thinkers really expanded on this idea. Jung Byung-gil, for instance, focused deeply on popular spirituality, interpreting both Donghak and Daesoon thought as the core spiritual worldview of the grassroots public. Daesoon thought, in particular, involved a total radical transformation of how we view both the divine and humanity. In fact, some scholars interpret its core tenet, this idea of resolution of grievances for mutual beneficence, as a postmodern alternative modernity to Western crises. That brings us to Section 3, political and cultural modernity. This is honestly where we find one of the sharpest and most fascinating contrasts in all the research, analyzed by scholars like Kim Ji-ha and Kim Tak. It's an incredible dichotomy. On one side, you have Donghak thought, which is categorized by political modernity. So we're talking organizational revolution and this really dynamic, active opening of the world. But on the other side, Daesoon thought is categorized by cultural modernity. So instead of a political revolution, it focuses heavily on everyday practice, aiming for a much more peaceful, tranquil opening of the world. Now, what's really great about these comparative studies is how impartially researchers weigh these two approaches. Neither is presented as, better or more right than the other. Rather, the academic literature neutrally validates how both ideologies uniquely aim to transform the world and overcome boundaries. It's just this beautifully nuanced correlation between 2 distinct, uniquely Korean systems of thought that are both trying to address the modern human condition. Which naturally leads us to Section 4, the philosophical approach to self-generated modernity. Okay, to really dissect these traditions, academics rely on some pretty complex methodologies, like the ones we see in Choi Won-hook's extensive research. We need to unpack 2 major terms here, liminality and self-generated modernity. Think of liminality as, well, standing in a doorway. It's this transitional threshold stage where cultural and sacred transformations actually take place. And then self-generated modernity asserts that modernization in Korea wasn't just some concept imported from the West. It grew organically from within, right through these very movements. And to analyze that organic growth, scholars are using incredibly diverse cross-cultural approaches. We're seeing the integration of Western process philosophy, with scholars like Kim Young-jae actually applying process theology to interpret Donghak's view of God. We also see a really heavy emphasis on correlative thinking, which is an essential framework of traditional Eastern philosophy. It is a true East-West integration, fundamentally seeking the exact intersection between traditional Eastern thought and modern scientific philosophy. So this brings up a mind-bending question. I mean, if these scholars are combining ancient Eastern spirituality with Western process philosophy, how on earth do these traditional Eastern thoughts connect to modern physics? Well, let's find out in Section 5, Convergence with Fractal Science. Honestly, this is the absolute cutting-edge frontier of this research, literally where ancient philosophy meets modern physics. Researchers are actively using concepts like synchronicity, which is this integrated approach combining religion and science, to interpret these traditional ideologies. Through international societies of science and religion, scholars are suddenly looking at these historical Korean thoughts in a completely new, scientifically rigorous light. And the ultimate bridge they are using for this? Fractal patterns. If you aren't familiar, this is the scientific concept where the whole is intricately repeated within its parts. Kind of like how a single branch mimics the exact shape of the entire tree. Well, researchers argue that the traditional Eastern correlative thinking found in Donghak and Daesoon, where the cosmos and the individual perfectly mirror one another, is essentially a philosophical fractal. It absolutely proves that these self-generated thoughts were incredibly far ahead of their time. But, we have to ask, why does all this matter today? Because this massive body of research isn't just about cataloging history for the sake of it. By reinterpreting Korean modernity through this integrated East-West approach, the ultimate goal is actually deriving practical implications for solving modern social issues. It is all about finding real, structural, philosophical solutions for the very real crises we face in our contemporary world today. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. If a self-generated, uniquely Korean philosophy from the 19th century can map perfectly onto modern fractal science and even offer alternatives to today's cultural crises, what ancient paradigm will guide our modern future? This research shows us that the answers to tomorrow's problems might just be waiting for us in the philosophies of the past. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.